What's good, YouTube? Welcome back. Thank you for clicking onto this reaction. I hope you're looking forward to it just as much as I am. If you haven't already, head over to the content creators page. That link is in the description box down below. If you haven't already and you're enjoying our content, you know what you need to do. You need to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, but we're going to jump straight into this one. And we've got Alexander the Great, Conquest, Balkan Campaigns 335 BC. By Kings and Generals, let's go.
Of all the enlightened intellectuals, brilliant artisans, cutthroat generals, and great kings in world history, Alexander the Great is undeniably the most renowned and debated. Was this most legendary Macedonian king an enlightened ruler or a debauching tyrant?
Sorry, my man,
did he eventually succumb to alcohol or belief in his own godhood? We here at Kings and Generals, after a long delay, hope to provide some insight into all of those myriad questions and many, many more.
I'm looking
Welcome
forward to
to
how
our
you're
series on
them.
the stunning conquests of King of Macedon, Alexander III. Our first video will cover just how Alexander recovered from the epochal death of his father, Philip II, and consolidated power. Many scholars, millions of others in learning, and to click the link in the description today. In October 336 BC, on the eve of launching his invasion of the Achaemenid Empire, Philip II of Macedon died to an assassin's dagger, leaving his ascendant kingdom to an uncertain future. But as soon as the monarch's body had been removed and order was restored, Antipater, one of Philip's most respected generals, immediately backed the late king's 20-year-old second son Alexander.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we didn't know that we had this guy involved from the Epic History TV's version. So this Antipater, the fact that he sort of backed Alexander, do you think that was a significant detail? Do you think if he didn't back him, Alexander would have struggled? Do you think he really needed this guy to sort of back him?
Who ascended to the throne as Alexander III. This young king inherited three key things from his father. Firstly, the new Macedonian army, with its stalwart phalanx, brilliant cavalry, and exceptional marshals.
And I'm assuming there were probably veterans as well.
Secondly, the Hellenic League, a post-Chaeronea hegemony over every other Greek state except Sparta.
Okay, I see. So there was some sort of council, and they had the most superior power within the council, or the leaders of the sort of council.
Finally, Alexander inherited a Macedonian bridgehead in Western Asia Minor, manned by 10,000 troops under generals Parmenion and Attalus.
Okay.
But these inheritances were...
I see what you mean. They're right over on the side, providing a way for Alexander to get onto the Middle Eastern Peninsula. Antipater was crucial early supporter, which helped sway others to Alexander's side, and he would prove to be a crucial figure much later on as the regent of Macedonia when Alex was away. Perfect. Thank you very much, Light. I'll be definitely looking forward to sort of keeping my eye onto this character within this story arc,
and to keep them.
Sorry, and this series is very detailed and the best on the platform in regards to Alexander. Very looking forward to finding out why that is, Christopher, and let's jump straight into it.
Alexander would have to fight, politic, and appease. Showing his mettle, the new king and his ruthless mother, Olympias, immediately conducted a dynastic purge of key opponents. A loyal friend was dispatched to Asia Minor, where, probably by compromising on military commands, he flipped Parmenion to Alexander's side and subsequently assassinated Attalus, who had been conspiring with external enemies.
Nice, you gotta have a loyal friend who's willing to do that sort of stuff for you.
That decisive stroke purged perhaps the most threatening internal rival to Alexander's kingship. Philip's death had also left the wider geopolitical situation incredibly unstable, triggering anti-Macedonian rumblings in the conquered Greek states, particularly Thebes and Athens, as well as unrest in subdued tribal areas such as Thrace and Illyria. Although advised by Antipater and others to remain cautious, Alexander, as he ever would, instead chose boldness and audacity.
And that's the reason why we love him.
He grabbed 3,000 hand-picked cavalry and sped south along the coastal road in order to reassert royal authority.
Go on, Alexander.
Arriving at the Vale of Tempe, Alexander found the pass between Mount Olympus and Mount Ossa held against him by a strong Thessalian force, who told the king to halt while they decided whether or not to admit him. Unwilling to sit by while this recalcitrant vassal blocked his path, Alexander had his men carve steps into the seaward side of Mount Ossa, rode his entire force over, and came up on the Thessalians from behind. He was quickly acknowledged as their overlord after that, and moved on unhindered.
Damn straight, motherfucking unhindered, Alexander the GOAT.
With blistering speed, Alexander rode south, and had the symbolically important Amphictyonic Council declare him hegemon at Thermopylae. Then, before the Greeks even knew what was happening, the Macedonian king materialized outside Thebes, shocking the proud city and assuring its temporary submission.
That I remember
Athens,
from the Epic
which
History
always
TV
chafed
version.
under Macedonian rule, nevertheless sent envoys north, assuring Alexander of its loyalty. His boldness, daring, and ability having scared the Greeks into passivity, Alexander convened the Hellenic League at Corinth, had his status confirmed, and then returned to Macedon. He did all of
the GOAT, just whipping out that big dick and just doing Chad moves. I am the Donny, shut up and follow me.
This in the course of 2 short months. The winter leading into 335 BC was spent giving the Macedonian army a crash course in mountain warfare.
Ooh,
now that
smart,
Greece had been dealt with, Alexander needed to neutralize the rowdy tribes of Thrace and Illyria, so that they were not a threat at home during the upcoming Persian invasion.
That's really interesting. In fact, he took foresight into thinking about training people and population about sort of mountain fighting, and so that he could deal with this threat. Very, very interesting.
When spring of 335 arrived, Alexander advanced north from Amphipolis at the head of 12,000 heavy infantry, Peshetyroi, 8,000 lighter infantry, and 3,000 cavalry.
Okay.
Arrian states that the Macedonian army first faced real Thracian opposition at Mount Haemus.
Thracian. These are the mountain to the north, right? Alexander technically and quick tenacity and quick actions and thinking are clearly shown in the Balkan Campaign. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing it. It seems like it could be.
Where the lower slopes of the mountain rise through a narrow defile. This was probably the modern Shipka Pass. There, a substantial force of Thracians occupied the high pass, fronting their defensive position with a wagon fort. But Alexander, prescient both to his own weakness and the Thracians' offensive bent, realized that it was their plan to send the wagons crashing into his locked phalanx. He warned the heavy infantry of this and carefully instructed them how to deal with the situation.
Nice. How's he going to deal with it?
Alexander ordered the ascent. Archers off to the right, phalanx regiments in the center, and his hypaspists on the left. As predicted, the Thracians sent their wagons careening down the mountain, straight at the tightly packed Macedonians.
Alright.
Following their
It was smart that he realized what they were going to do. How are they going to deal with
king's
this?
instruction, the Phalangites calmly broke formation and opened gaps to let the wagons go by harmlessly, if terrain allowed, and lay prone with their locked shields above their head. If not,
just in case you
not
run
a
over
single
them.
soldier was lost to the Thracian ploy, and the Macedonians rose to their feet with a cheer. Morale.
Oh, so fucking sick, Alexander. That's fucking sick. The fact he realized what they were going to do, he made a plan, and what's the enemy thinking now? They didn't take out a single soldier. They're fucked. They're absolutely fucked.
Alexander ordered the right flank archers to take up position in front of the phalanx, where they repelled a number of weak Thracian attacks by loosing arrow volleys. When the heavy troops, whose advance was eased by the archers, reached the lip of the pass, they easily dislodged an enemy whose armor and weaponry was nowhere near theirs. 1,500 tribesmen were killed, but a significant...
Once again, they weren't a trained military. Also, their big surprise plan that they were hoping was going to be the sort of big impact onto the army didn't work. So, of course, they were going to start panicking and their morale was sort of going to go.
Significant number more managed to escape. Captured women, children, equipment and goods were sent back to raise much needed funds. Descending onto the Danubian plain and the land of the Trebalians, Alexander encamped 3 days' march from the Danube at a tributary known as the Liginus. Sermus, king of the Trebalians, had been sending scouts to keep an eye on the Macedonian army's movement ever since their incursion began. Realizing he had to take action, the chief withdrew a large part of his population, warriors, women and children, to a large island in the middle of the Danube.
Smart. Okay, he doesn't want to deal with them.
Alerted to this suspicious population movement, Alexander pushed his army in that direction. However, he had only just set off when the king had his line of retreat and communication cut by a second Trebalian force, which slipped in behind.
It's only a small force though, right?
Decisively turning about, Alexander fought this contingent in the process of encamping near the Liginus. His pace appears to have caught them with their trousers down, and the barbarians retreated into a wooded glen.
And now there's a bigger force coming as well. But once again, Alexander just being so quick and decisive and just acting on those decisions. So good.
Loath to risk his heavy infantry, the king formed them up, but brought forward his missile troops to pepper the lighter armed Trebalians with arrows and bolts, until, unable to endure the hail, they charged out. With his Thracian foe now shorn of their defensive terrain, inside which they were notoriously good fighters, Alexander sent a wing of Hetyroi at either flank.
That's it, he got that flanking maneuver and it was all just over.
While the phalanx cut the tribesmen to ribbons. 3,000 of them died, at the cost of 54 Macedonians.
Only 54. Are those numbers right?
3 days' march later, and Alexander reached the Danube directly opposite Sermus's island refuge, known as Puke. There, as planned, he rendezvoused with a small squadron of warships sent from Byzantium, manned them with heavy troops and archers, and launched an attack on the island. Unfortunately for the Macedonians, a mixture of dogged resistance, limited avenues of attack, and a fierce current led to the failure of this attack. Seeing he was getting nowhere, Alexander withdrew the ships to the southern bank. By that time, a formidable band of 10,000 nomadic Getae infantry and 4,000 horsemen had gathered on the far side of the Danube. Rather than seeing this as a threat, though, Alexander saw an opportunity. Smash the Getae, and the island might well surrender out of sheer terror.
They've got no reinforcements.
But his army had to cross the Danube, and his small fleet was not enough. So Alexander ordered that every single native canoe and craft be gathered up, so that floats could be made from tents stuffed with hay.
Nice, nice. The first time I've sort of heard Alexander doing any sort of engineering on campaign. That's a nice little tidbit.
Thus provisioned with such a makeshift fleet, that night, masked by the darkness, Alexander boldly ferried 4,000 of his infantry and 1,500 cavalry across the Danube. Successful, he disembarked them on a section of the north bank, which was masked from the nearby Getae by tall fields of grain.
He was able to do that, you know.
Just before dawn, the king drew up his forces with infantry in front to flatten the grain with their sarisi and cavalry behind. The moment Alexander's strike force broke through the grain, the king personally charged his 1,500 cavalry straight at the Getae, while the terrifyingly disciplined Macedonian phalanx went forward in lockstep.
Mate, those phalanx were so scary back in the day.
Cavalry, and faced with the pincushion phalanx, The Getae collapsed and fled to a nearby town 4 miles from the river. But hotly pursued by the Macedonians, the semi-nomadic Getae mounted as many civilians as they could and fled onto the steppe. After leading his triumphant troops back to camp on the south shore,
nice.
Alexander's prediction became reality.
Yeah, the rest were leaving the castle.
Awed into submission by this display of martial prowess, sent envoys of capitulation to the king.
Nice.
At about the same time, an embassy of tall Celts arrived, desiring Alexander's friendship.
Okay.
The king asked these veritable giants what they were scared of, hoping they would say his name. Instead, they famously remarked that they feared that the sky would fall on their heads. Alexander was not pleased, but sent them off as friends.
Interesting. Interesting that they said the sky was going to fall on their heads.
With the potential danger posed by Thrace adequately cut down, the Macedonian army marched south via the Shipka Pass. Rather than
the phalanx is equivalent of an ancient cheat code. No cavalry or infantry is going to get past a wall of spears. Yeah, I completely agree. Especially the ones that they had. There was an extra 6 feet of length on their ones, weren't they? The phalanx, compared to a normal spear.
Turning south, Alexander pivoted west and entered the domain of his ally, King Langaris of the Agrianians, who had accompanied the king on campaign with his force of deadly Agrianese skirmishers. There he learned that the 3 Illyrian rulers, Cleitus, Glaucius, and a prince of the Etoriantes, were in revolt against him. But for the moment, all of the king's enemies were scattered. So, leaving his faithful Agrianian colleague to deal with the Etoriantes, Alexander sped to assail Cleitus's mountain stronghold at Pelium before the Illyrians could join forces.
Oh, okay. Nice. Nice, so he doesn't have to deal with them.
The plain on which this citadel stood, dominating the Apsus Valley, was surrounded on 3 sides by densely wooded hills, which could only be traversed by a narrow pass. It was hard to get in, but also hard to get out. The moment Alexander marched his army onto the plain before Pelium, its defenders withdrew to safety behind the walls. Such freedom of the land allowed the Macedonian king to encamp and begin pulling forward his siege equipment. That proved to be a tactical error on Alexander's part. Less than 24 hours later, Glaucius and his Tolentian relief force arrived, occupying strong positions on the wooded heights encircling Pelium and trapping Alexander.
So Alexander thought he had more time, but he just didn't.
In need of supplies, the king dispatched the baggage train and a mounted escort under Philotas to forage near the hills. Noticing this, Glaucius shifted his forces and almost encircled Philotas, but Alexander reacted swiftly. Moving to Philotas' aid with a picked force of Agrianes, Hypaspists, and 400 cavalry, the king managed to save his comrade and send Glaucius back onto the hills. Despite this small win, the fact remained that the Macedonian army was in a bind, caused entirely by the king's hasty miscalculation. If Alexander attempted to withdraw through the narrow pass now, there was a danger that Cleitus's Pelium garrison would assail his men from behind. If he stayed where he was, unable to gather supplies and ringed by enemies, the result would be inevitable destruction.
Really has got himself into a difficult situation. How is he going to get out of this?
To his credit, Alexander thought fast and came up with a ploy. He drew up the Sarissa phalanx into a mass formation, 120 ranks deep, flanked by 200 cavalry on either side. Then the king had his highly disciplined infantry conduct drills. At a signal, the phalangites would have, in perfect unison, raised their sarissai to vertical before lowering them to horizontal. Like a programmed machine of war, they pivoted right, left, back and forth again, all in utter silence. Disconcerted and enthralled by this unprecedented display of martial prowess, the barbarians were not ready when Alexander gave his final signal. Suddenly, the infantry clattered their spears against their shields and raised a war cry. At the same time,
Is he
the
just
left
trying to
flank
shock him?
of the Macedonian Hetyroi seamlessly formed into a wedge and charged a portion of Glaucius's men guarding the hills.
Okay.
The demoralized Taulantians, taken aback by the charge and the noise, mostly abandoned their hilltop positions and with
Ah, yes, Alexander. Yes. Literally just scaring the shit out of them, reducing that morale and getting them the fuck out of here. Fuck off. Absolutely fucking ballsy move. You are so fucking right. Like, that is fucking jokes. Yeah, if they could have called his bluff, that was it. He had no chance. That was it. The phalanx, it honestly blows your mind that Philip managed to completely transform the Macedonian army with such limited resources with the nation's poverty. It is very incredible that he was able to sort of manage to do that. Lucky for Alexander as well.
withdrew into Pelium. Taking advantage of the opportunity his maneuvering had created, Alexander marched his army towards an escape route, a ford in the Apsus just east of Pelium. He secured a hill overlooking it without resistance, and ordered the Hypaspes to cross first, followed by the phalanx.
Okay.
Realizing their quarry might be about to escape the trap, the tribesmen turned, descending on the crossing point. But Alexander, the companions and Agrianes valiantly protected it for long enough that siege catapults could be set up on the far side, where they began...
Alexander, I went to say Caesar there, so used to saying yes, Caesar. Yes, Alexander, fucking the catapults as well. Go on, boy.
bombarding the Illyrians. This first ever use of field artillery and covering fire from archers allowed the crossing to be completed, and all
Once again, the first person to adapt and start using siege warfare in field. So impressive.
of a sudden, the Macedonians were free. Not having lost a single man in extracting his army, and not content with just running away, Alexander withdrew a few miles from the Pelium area and waited, sending out constant scouting parties to see what Glaucius and Cletus were doing.
No, I'm not at all. I definitely remember hearing that Caesar looked up to Alexander.
After 3 days of general recuperation, a reconnaissance force returned with good news. Believing Alexander was gone, the Illyrians were strung out, encamped without sentries, fortifications or trenches. Sensing that an opportunity was ripe for the taking, Alexander assembled his usual crack force of companions, Agrianes and some archers, and went on the attack. Under the cover of a dark night, the Macedonian king moved back into the valley, and with his Agrianians at the forefront, assaulted the unsuspecting Illyrians on a narrow front.
Nice.
It was a slaughter. As Arrian relates, some they killed in their beds, others they took without difficulty as they tried to escape. Many were caught and killed on the spot,
Really?
many more as they fled.
I thought there was going to be a bit more of a battle, but no, they just fucking slaughtered them. They just absolutely slaughtered them. Holy shit.
In panic
What a great
and
victory.
disorder.
The fact that this isn't even his peak of genius at the siege of Tyre, he takes a city with no one. Sorry, he had taken a city no one had ever taken by assault. That's going to be very impressive. I'm looking forward to finding out that. Why am I struggling to read and talk today?
His entire army cut down or scattered by an enemy he thought long gone, fled to Pelium, set it ablaze, and then fled to refuge in Taulantian territory with Glaucius, whose forces suffered a similar fate.
So he didn't capture any of the generals, and he didn't pursue them. He just took the victory and then backed off. That was interesting.
Our primary sources do not detail exactly where Alexander went next, but Peter Green believes that the Macedonians marched up the country to a crossing in the Tcherna River, where they reunited with a victorious Langaris. With news of victory, however, the Agrianian king brought Alexander ill tidings from Greece. Always hating their new ignominious place under the iron boot of Macedon, Thebes and Athens, together with a number of other Greek states, had been bubbling towards revolt for some time. But when
Don't wanna
dangerous
do it.
rumors spread that Alexander and his entire army had been killed by the Triballians, Thebes in particular took the opportunity, killed both senior officers of Alexander's garrison there, and raised the standard of rebellion.
Oh no, you fools. Alexander is going to come over here and slap your little bum and shut you up.
Alexander, angered but understanding that this revolt probably had connections to rival elements in the court at Pella, and might even be influenced by Persian gold, acted swiftly, moving over 30,000 troops 250 miles at a speed of 18 miles a day through rough mountain terrain.
Fuck! That's fucking impressive. That's impressive. 18 miles a day through rough terrain. There's no way I could travel 18 miles a day through rough terrain with all that armor and everything else. No way. No way. Yeah, Thebes is absolutely done for. Absolutely. Holy, I can't believe it. I won't be able to walk 18 miles a day.
The king descended into Thessaly, past Thermopylae, and encamped at Onchestus in Boeotia.
Not with armor and shit on.
Not long after that, in September 335 BC, he and his grizzled army were taking up positions outside Thebes, much to the disbelief of the city's inhabitants. There was surely no way for an army of such a scale to arrive with such speed from a far-off barbarian country. Moreover, Alexander was dead anyway, as the rumors said, so this must have been an army of new Macedonian recruits under Antipater. Only slowly did the Thebans realize, to their consternation, that Alexander was indeed still alive and in charge. Fortunately,
so what are you going to do, boys?
The king's temper had cooled, and he was willing to be reasonable. Keen to reconcile with Greece so he could look to his Pan-Hellenic war against the Achaemenid Empire, Alexander merely demanded that two of the uprising's ringleaders, Phoenix and Prothotes, be handed over.
I mean, you killed two of my garrison's generals, I killed two of you. Fair. Completely fair. Remember that some of these men followed Alexander all the way. That means they marched from Greece to the edge of India. Oh my god. Absolutely
And everything
insane.
else could be forgiven. The Thebans spat on this olive branch, making a brazen counter-demand that Philotas and Antipater should instead be handed to them.
Ah.
Moreover, all who wanted Greece free from this Macedonian tyrant should rally under the banner of the great king and Thebes.
They are gonna be
As Alexander flew into a rage at this nerve-grazing comment, Theban light infantry streamed from the gates and made lightning attacks on the Macedonian siege works with ranged weapons, killing a decent number of the king's troops, and even approaching his main position before they were repulsed.
And it didn't seem like they took
Night fell,
that much damage
passed,
themselves.
And then the sun rose again, at which time Alexander shifted his army south to the Electra Gate, which was within shouting distance of his beleaguered garrison at the Cadmea fortress.
I see.
It is somewhat difficult to reconcile the disparate accounts of what came next. However, after 3 days, it seems as though a segment of Thebes' army, smaller than Alexander's, left the walls and deployed to face the king, who arrayed a greater part of the relentless phalanx to meet them. Other smaller units were seconded to assault the city walls and attempted to breach the city, while another small contingent under Perdiccas remained in reserve, close to the palisade. As Roman historian Quintus Curtius Rufus relates of the main clash, the Macedonians exerted a force that could hardly be withstood because of the numbers of their men and the weight of the phalanx, but the Thebans were superior in bodily strength and in their constant training in the gymnasium. Fighting with grim determination to defend their families and city from slavery, the defenders came within a hair's breadth of breaking the phalanx. However, at the decisive moment, the mobile reserve units under Perdiccas outflanked the Theban line and managed to break into the city itself.
Oh, they actually broke in.
A detachment of Alexander's archers. Worse still, the Macedonian garrison in Cadmea, noticing the opportunity, broke out and caused even further disorder.
That's it.
When the king had his phalanx redouble their assault, The Thebans, realizing that
Yes,
the enemy was
Alexander.
inside the walls, routed.
Yes, my
Their
man.
cavalry managed to flee across into open country.
So the enemy cavalry
The
got
throng
away,
of
but
stampeding, terrified
that matters.
hoplites was so great that the Electra Gate became clogged and could not be closed before the main body of Alexander's infantry got inside. Bitter, brutal street fighting followed, during which a contingent of Thebes' soldiery fought a valiant last stand near the Amphium.
Look at that total war screen just there. Like, those phalanxes, you ain't getting anywhere near to stab a man with one of those, are you? Like, your shield is not going to hand up. You can't get within arm's reach to actually stab anyone. That's terrifying.
Which a contingent of Thebes' soldiery.
Imagine refusing peace when an enemy army is at your city's doors. I know, it's absolutely stupid. You would think, like you would at least pay him something to get him to go away. And then once he's gone, ignore him. Do you know what I mean? At least.
Fought a valiant last stand near the Amphium. But the Macedonians and their allies, sweeping atop the walls and around the streets, butchered them from every side. Thebes was brutally sacked. Arrian tells us that the main culprits were Alexander's resentful anti-Thebes allies from Boeotia, such as the Phocians, Thespians and Plataeans, but the Macedonians certainly played a part. Doors were kicked in, houses and temples throughout the city stormed, and their occupants murdered or subjected to outrage without limit, be they man, woman or child.
I mean, at the end of the day, you've forced them to lose men and take the city. What do you expect?
By nightfall,
of course
the
they're going to be
bloodbath
fucking
had claimed
angry.
6,000 lives, and 30,000 more were captured. Alexander entrusted the broken city's final fate to the allies, who had been long subjugated to it. As he probably intended, these Boeotians decided that Cadmea would remain garrisoned, but the remainder of the city was utterly annihilated, and its land divided among the allies. Every woman and child would be sold into slavery.
Holy shit, Alexander destroyed Thebes. Took it to the ground.
News
Crazy.
of Thebes' grisly fate reverberated around.
Like you said, the phalanx would remain vertically unstoppable until the advent of the Roman Manipal legionary system. I'm with you.
Greece like an earthquake, prompting the execution of anti-Macedonian demagogues and the calming of revolts before they began. Compliance was the order of the day. Turning his burning gaze to Athens, which had remained aloof, despite having played an obvious role in the outbreak, Alexander coldly ordered the great city to turn over 10 strategoi who had opposed his interests.
Okay.
Instead, an Athenian known as Demades went to Alexander and managed to persuade the king to forgive and forget, which he reluctantly did. But this final clemency didn't avail him in the long term. With Thebes' unprecedented and shocking extermination, Alexander hammered the final nail into the coffin of his relationship with other Greeks.
The other Greeks, I'm assuming, saw him as a tyrant from that point onwards.
Outwardly, they collaborated with cynical obsequiousness, as Peter Green tells us, but they never forgave him. After their first shocked terror had worn off, the attitude of the Greeks towards Alexander hardened into a bitter and implacable hatred.
I mean, why? Why? You caused it. Thebes caused it. Caused the problem to come onto themselves. What do you expect? What do you expect?
But for the moment, the king was
yeah, he went Genghis Khan mode on the Thebes.
not overly
Absolutely
concerned with
destroyed
that.
them.
The invasion of the Achaemenid Empire was now imminent, and we'll talk about it in the next episode, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it.
Well, I am definitely looking forward to jumping on to the next reaction to this great series in our next stream. Oh my god, yeah, there was a lot of details in this one that were missed.